Hello, and welcome to How to Prepare Your Facility for a Regulatory Inspection webinar. My name is Drew Prohaska. I'm the Marketing Manager at DEKRA Safety Management System. I'm going to cover a few housekeeping items today before we get started, and then I'm going to turn it over to our presenters. So first of all, everybody is in listen-only mode, which means you're muted automatically, so we don't have to worry about any background noise or interruptions. This webinar is being recorded. So a recording will be sent out to everybody after the webinar within a day or two, as well as the presentation slides. So I'll be sending all those out to attendees. If you have any questions during the webinar, you'll find the questions panel in your control pane, and you'll type any questions you have about the webinar into that panel, and we will have time at the end of the webinar to cover any questions. Or if our presenters see that a question is relevant to the information they're talking about at the time, they can cover it at that point in time. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Corey Hopkins, who is going to cover a little bit of information about an engagement portion of the webinar we are incorporating today. And he's going to give you some instructions, and we'll go through that. So Corey Hopkins, go ahead and take it away.
All right, thanks, Drew. And again, thanks everyone for attending. I know a lot more people are working mobilely today, so we want to try to provide some information that may be helpful for you here. The one thing we do want to try today is a little mobile polling, which is a new tool that it's not a new tool, it's a tool we're new to. So these webinars can be a little bit mundane, so we want to try to get a little engagement here. So there's two ways that you can poll this morning during our webinar. And that is via the website. We use a Turning Technologies tool, and the website address is ttpoll.com. You can see that up there. And when you log in there or get on that site, you're going to see that screen, and you're going to put session ID DEKRA, all lowercase, DEKRA, and click Join Session. Or you can use a telephone app if you prefer to use a smartphone. Go to your Apple Store or your Google Play Store and download the Turning Point Technologies app, and we'll give you a few minutes here to do that, and when you do that, then you can click on open there. So those are the two ways, via the app or the website. When you do get in, you can just pick the guest rather than signing in, since you probably don't have an account. Just pick the guest tab, and on the app again there's your DEKRA as the session ID, DEKRA lowercase, and hit join session. All right, Joe. The name and email is optional. You can put that in if you'd like, or if you just click submit, we've got it set as optional. This is a tool you can use to record people's name, but we don't necessarily need your name for this one. So if you want to just click submit, you can, and that will get you into the polling. One thing you're going to see once you get in is it's going to say polling closed, and that's the normal screen until we hit a slide that has a question or is requesting information from you. You're going to see the screen that says polling closed. It may also show the actual presentation, so that's something that's kind of new that just started as well. So those are the ways to get into the polling, and we hope you're able to get logged on and give us some input during this session. All right, Joe, if you want to cover this part.
Yeah, so the target audience today is anyone that's willing to learn. Our EH&S professionals typically are the ones that, if there's a regulatory inspection, will get notified and included, but regional managers, location managers, supervisors, all of those levels of management also get involved. So try to give some perspective from Corey and I's experience. That will be, hopefully you can take back and will be helpful here. So some key points that we want to cover are the different agencies. Myself, I have more experience from 12 years being a consultant from the mock OSHA side, myself conducting several hundred mock OSHA audits, and in some cases those being abatement audits, where our audit findings, our reports will go to the customer and OSHA. Corey being on in his former roles of being a corporate safety director and being involved with the different agencies as well. So we got a few different perspectives there. We'll hit some protocols to follow for your policies, learning and improving from inspections, some outreach opportunities maybe you haven't thought of before, some different checklist templates that we've pulled down for you to review as well, and just Corey and I's best practices that we've picked up on to make the inspection more of a positive experience, or a little less negative than maybe you would think it would be. So with that, Corey, let's go ahead and encourage them to follow your company protocols. So this webinar today, we're going to be about an hour. We're going to give you our experiences. We're going to pull from the agencies themselves, but when this is done, you need to go with your legal and follow your company protocols on how they want to handle, specifically within the policies and procedures, when a regulatory inspector comes to your sites. Company procedures for notification should include how you're going to notify your management teams, site employees being notified, and then the EH&S team also being notified. Corey, while we're here, any other best practices that you'd like to hit on from your
experience? I think if you do have an EHS team coming from the EHS world since 1999, we definitely want to be involved in that. If you don't have one, obviously, then you can't notify them. But if you do have a team, they're definitely need to be aware. And then the other thing is being familiar with your rights, that second bullet point up there. You do have certain rights when it comes to these inspections. Being familiar with those is important. So other than that, no, I think as Joe mentioned, you do need to develop and follow your own protocol. So here's some agencies that are typical regulatory agencies that may come on site. EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. The big one, OSHA, that everybody dreads or talks about probably the most, Occupational Safety and Health Administration. DOT, Department of Transportation. DNR, Department of Natural Resources. FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. And then others that may come on site, State Department of Ag. Some of our ag customers have warehouse inspectors that come in and check inventories. Licensing agencies, fire marshal or local fire departments. There's others as well, but this is kind of a general list. Alphabet soup, as Joe calls this.
Yeah, the dreaded abbreviation soup there. So I think we got our first clicker question of the day. So let's go ahead and pull everybody. So take an opportunity here to respond, but do you have a formal policy for handling regulatory inspections? So go ahead and respond. We'll give a little extra seconds here as everyone is getting familiar with the technology. Looks like we have some answers coming in, Corey, so looks like you did a good job of explaining.
It's pretty simple, so.
All right, looks like answers have stopped coming in, so I'm going to go ahead and display. So it looks like most people do have a formal policy. We will go, for those of you that don't, we'll share some best practices throughout that can help. Specific questions, we would encourage to fire them over as Drew explained. This also gives us the ability to follow up with you one-on-one after the webinar. So those of you that are in the 20% category that would like a little more guidance or assistance, please fire away a very specific question in the pane as Drew explained, and Corey and I can follow up with you post-webinar. So to keep us moving along, Corey, we do have another clicker question here. Have you yourself been a part of a regulatory inspection?
Yeah, this is a true false. You have been a part of a regulatory inspection in the past. And the reason I asked this one was I went several years as a safety professional before I had my first regulatory inspection. So just because you're in the industry doesn't mean you have a lot of inspections.
All right, So we got a good amount of the group that has, Corey.
Yep.
Well, why don't we go ahead and you cover some key points for when inspectors arrive.
Yeah, so obviously an inspector arrives at your facility, how do you handle it? So the key thing, or the first thing, is to follow protocols just like it's any other visitor. So if you have a sign-in, a formal sign-in process, make sure that they sign in so that you can account for them if there is some sort of an emergency. Most emergency action plans include some sort of sign-in process for visitors. So if yours doesn't, that might be something you want to revisit as well. You can and should request their credentials. So they will have a ID badge or number with their picture typically, and they will provide that. They know that they're supposed to provide that to you. And then you're gonna, once you get the credentials, you're gonna determine the scope and notify management. Those are kind of the key first two things that you want to do. Once you do get their credentials, make sure that you have a notepad and write down their name, title, and ID number, and maintain that for your records so that you have that when you go to kind of summarize the inspection at the end. Obviously, determining the purpose and scope of the inspection. Is this a routine inspection? Is it a complaint, an employee complaint, or a neighbor complaint if it's an environmental issue? Or is it a targeted inspection? In other words, if you're in a certain industry, they may target certain things that are going on in that industry. You need to determine why are they there and what is the scope of this inspection. And then if you can get a feel for whether or not samples, testing, pictures, or any other kind of monitoring is expected during the inspection, that's always a good thing to do up front as well. Next slide, Joe. Also, make sure that the right representatives are in attendance. And this could take a little time. When I worked for a large cooperative, we had multiple locations. So if an inspector showed up at any particular location, I could be an hour to 2 hours away. 1 hour is about best practice as long as you want to hold an inspector. The inspectors are normally pretty understanding for this. Depending on the agency, it normally begins with an opening conference. So if you can get the right reps, whether that's your EHS folks or regional vice president or an operations manager, whatever level that is that your company calls for, you hope to be able to get them there for that opening conference. Now, that's not always going to be the case. If it's too long of a wait, then, or maybe you're on vacation and you're not able to get there, then you'll have to proceed with the best that you can do. Also, if there are any policies or other documents that you determine during that scope review, you want to try to get that information up front so that you can get it efficiently and get it gathered and make sure that you have that available for the inspector. Another thing you want to do right now before any inspector comes is ask yourself, what would their first impression be of your facility if they were to come on site right now? Okay, that's a great question to pose to yourself, because I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase where someone says they can tell how an inspection is going to go within the first 5 minutes. Well, that's all based on first impressions. So maintaining good housekeeping at your facility and being organized, maintaining a clean facility is very critical. You want to remove the low-hanging fruit as well. So one of the areas that seems to get neglected in many facilities is the shop. That's a notorious area where there's low-hanging fruit and a lot of potential citations. Go out and look at your shop. What does that look like? So the office may be perfectly organized and clean, but you go to the shop and it's disheveled. So those are some things that you can handle now and make sure that you get good protocols in place so that they're always in neat and good condition and good housekeeping. So.
And Corey, I go back to my operation days. I had a really good regional manager that stressed on us at our site that he always said, make it look like a church. And what he meant by that is you very rarely go to a church and the grass isn't cut, the flowers aren't in order, the snow isn't removed. It looked inviting. If things are put away the grass is cut, the weeds are down, there isn't pallets leaning everywhere, and everything doesn't look disheveled, then it looks like the site has things in order, at least has that perception. If things are out of order, the grass is tall, the weeds aren't cut, the outside the shop, everything just looks disheveled, it just looks like a mess, then what else is being ignored? Was always the message that he sent to us. So that goes to that first impressions.
Yep. Good point, Joe.
So what about making an inspector wait, Corey? Is that a good idea or a bad idea?
Okay, well, I can speak to this one from personal experience, and the answer is it depends. Sometimes you do need to gauge the attitude of the inspector and see, where are they? Are they perfectly fine with waiting? You can gauge that with a phone call typically. Or if they're antsy and the location manager thinks that they really don't want to wait, then it's probably a good idea to have a discussion with that manager and get the inspection started as you travel. So for me, if I was able to talk to someone at the site and they felt comfortable with getting started with that opening conference, finding out the scope, and even possibly getting started with the walk around, we tried to coach our folks ahead of time. And when you have a formal program, like most on the call said they did, 80%, that is stuff that you can practice and go over so that people are comfortable when that person comes on site. So typically, if you're a ways away, it's best to see if you can get that thing started, get some of that opening conference done, and while you're traveling. Now, again, make sure you follow your organization's protocol. If there's strict protocol against that, we're not trying to give you bad information here. But it's just a best practice that I've experienced through the years.
And I guess I'll add a note here as well. Corey, in your previous life, some of your inspectors will come from Des Moines, which for some of your locations were 2, 3, even 4 hours away. And these are people living lives just like we are. They got ball games, they got other things they're getting back for, and those things, making them wait, that could add that irritation. So treating them like a human being, because they are a human being, they're there to do a job, they're trying to do it the best of their ability. And, from an OSHA perspective, these people are out there trying to make the industry safer. They're trying to follow their mission. So, if you do wait, is it going to cause them to miss something that's previously planned? Can help gauge where they're at. So with that, Corey, I think you kind of got a scenario. Go ahead.
Yep. Just a second ago, we did have one question come in. Someone asked, what if an inspector refuses to sign in? I wouldn't anticipate that being an issue. Maybe you've had that actually, but I think for me, the best thing I could do is explain that if we have an emergency where we need to evacuate, we need to let emergency personnel know who is in or not in our facility. We need that for emergency action, our emergency action program and procedures. We need to be able to account for you. So I would just try to be reasonable with them and explain the why. If they are adamant that they won't sign in, then I may call their office. That's just, I guess, how I would approach it. Any thoughts on that yourself, Joe?
I would handle it the same as in your emergency action plan. If you're going to have any visitors leave your office, in most emergency action plans, they need to sign in to be accounted for your emergency response planning and head count and those things. So I think if you educate the inspector, but if you still have the refusal, I think, Corey, what you said is right. I would call the office. I wouldn't be comfortable allowing them to go on a walkthrough of a location or a plant without them having not signed in. So that would be how I would handle it as well. So, all right, I'll let you go ahead and explain.
As Joe mentioned, okay, so we've got a scenario to run by you, and we're going to get your answer on this. Imagine that you're at a company training session, internal company training session, and your phone on silent mode, of course, shows 2 missed calls from an unfamiliar number. So you go outside the room and answer it on the 3rd time. It happens to be an EPA inspector who is not too happy he's been unable to reach you. He wants to do an SPCC, Spill Prevention Control and Countermeasures inspection on a gas card control station at which you don't staff employees. The manager of the energy department has an office about an hour from the inspector and has all the information he needs. What would you do? A, leave your meeting and head to the station. This will take about an hour, and you'll need to have the energy manager gather all of the information and also head toward the facility, which is going to take about an hour and a half to gather the information and travel. B, tell the inspector he's out of luck and will need to come to try another time. C, ask the inspector if he's willing to travel to the energy manager's office where he can get all the information on the tanks and ask any pertinent questions of the energy manager. D, hang up immediately. So we'll let you guys decide what you would do in this scenario.
Yeah, looks like we got all the responses coming in. Yeah, leave it open. We got a couple more coming in, it looks like.
Yeah, it's a little longer question.
Yep,
here.
well, maybe allow a couple extra seconds here. Well, no one took your bait, Corey.
Well, 73 picked C. A few picked A. So those are, yeah, the two obvious. I guess that's the dilemma. So when I pose this isn't just a made-up scenario. This is a real-life issue that I encountered in my career, and I can tell you what I did. I went with 73% of you and picked C, and that did not go as planned. So just to let you know how that turned out, the inspector was already perturbed, as I mentioned, when he called me, and he had been trying to call me and he couldn't get a hold of me. There was no staff at the facility. We actually, the building that sat next to the card control station had a service station that was owned by someone else. And so he was not an employee of ours. And he told the inspector he had no idea on any of that stuff. So the inspector, I did go see, I asked if he would go to the other facility, sit with the energy manager to get the information he needed. So he decided when he got there that rather than do the inspection on the one card control station, he would do two inspections. So he inspected the card control station and the facility our energy manager officed in. So we got two for the price of one, and that was not a good thing in this case. So, and his mood didn't get any better throughout the day, and you could tell that with the multiple citations he wrote at each facility. So it turned out to be quite a deal, and he really cited us for some really minor things that typically a reasonable inspector would not do. So this just was kind of a mess, and really, you know, the fact that we weren't there, I guess the biggest key factor is we hadn't created a plan for if an inspector showed up at that station. So in hindsight, we wished we would have had that individual at that facility prepared to tell him what to do in the event that inspector showed up. So anyway, good learning lesson for me, and you can see how it went. So, all right, Joe, go to the next slide.
I think this goes to your point with your experiences, you know, over the phone, establishing what the inspector is looking for. In most circumstances, this is going to be able to be done on site, you know, so you want to be able to provide them what they're asking for, but we don't want to over provide. And what we mean there is this isn't an opportunity for show and tell. If they're there, we establish a scope, and they want to look at your lockout, tagout procedures and policies, then we want to be able to provide those for them. This isn't necessarily we want to hand them the entire safety manual. You know, out of panic, sometimes if we're not prepared, a person may go just grab the 3-ring binder off the shelf and hand it to them and say, here's our entire manual. Resist that urge. We want to be able to provide them what they've asked for in the manner in which they've asked for it. So if they ask for policies, then ask them specifically which ones they would like to see, and those are the ones we want to provide for them. We definitely want to stay in the compliance of the law. We don't want to lie or hide anything to inspectors, but at the same time, we don't want to turn this into a situation where we've opened ourselves up to further inspections or potential citations if we didn't need to. Corey, anything you'd like to add there from your experience? Okay.
No, I think just basically anything you present to an inspector is an opportunity for a citation or violation. So keep it designed to exactly what the scope is and only that scope. And we did have a individual on the call that mentioned bring the documents to the inspector, not the inspector to the documents. And I like that. I like that statement.
And for those of you that have electronic capabilities, there's some on here that use our safety management system product called Insight Via. I recommend in your response plan to educate your location managers and office personnel to print a new policy. Many times when you do that, it'll have the most revised date on that policy. So when that is brought to the inspector, that they're going to see that this is the most up to date. It's just going to show the ability of the location to obtain the documents in a quick fashion. Knocking dust off of a binder or a policy sometimes can send the wrong message. So that's another one to include in your processes.
All right, we got a different type of clicker question here, or different type of polling. We're going to show you a couple of slides, and we want you to text us what types of documents that you think these agencies may request. And we'll give you a full minute on this in case you're not a fast typer or a good texter. But if OSHA were to come up, just use your dialog box and text us some of the documents you think they may request upon arrival or during the inspection.
And for those of you that have been through an inspection, maybe from your experience, what have you seen them ask as well?
Yeah, we've had 60% of the folks attending the webinar that have had inspections, so you have a good idea of what they might ask for.
All right, we got some responses coming in.
Yeah, while we're waiting, Joe, there was a question that said, can you ask the inspector for a list in writing for documents and a time frame to submit? Okay, you can get a reasonable time frame. It doesn't show well when you can't produce documents or policies in a timely fashion. But I do think the standard allows for a certain time frame. I don't know off the top of my head what that exactly is, but it needs to be reasonable. It needs to be, I believe you need to produce it while they're there. I'm not 100% certain on that. But.
Well, I think we got all our responses in. So I'll go ahead and share those to the screen here. So we see a lot of different options here: training records, procedures, reporting, lockout, tagout, Ben entry, visitor log. We have some emergency action plan. That is definitely something we've covered. Emergency action plan, 300 logs, safety programs, injury and illness prevention program. So,
yep, good answers here. And if you go to the next slide, we just wanted to make sure that we covered some of these, and you've hit most of them, I believe. Typically they'll ask for the last 3 to 5. They've always asked me for 3, but you're required to keep 5. So I'm not sure, you know, why they usually only ask for 3, but the summary of work-related injuries, the OSHA 300A, have these available. And not just having them available, also study them. If there's a trend on those summaries, that inspector is likely to probe into that. So if you have a ton of strains, they may ask, you know, about your lifting and your ergonomics, things like that. But by studying and understanding them, you may be more prepared for the inspection. And then also be prepared to answer questions about the 300 days. If they ask you some questions and you're not familiar with it, that's not going to look real great. If you're familiar with them and you can speak to some of the corrective actions that have been put in place, that could lead to a better outcome. And then also be familiar with your regional enforcement programs and local enforcement programs in your area. And we'll touch on this a little bit in future slides, but those are some of the things that you can be prepared for that may be a part of your inspection.
All right, we got a similar format now, this time for EPA. So the same ability will be on your handheld device or web screen, whichever one you're using. So you can type in from an EPA perspective. What are some things from your experience they've asked for?
This provides a little time for questions and comments. There was one question put in as an inspector may say, who's in charge of safety at this facility? So are your folks that would receive an inspector prepared to answer that question? And what is the answer to that question? Is it our safety guy, or is it everybody's responsible for safety at this facility? So.
All right, looks like we've got some responses in, so I'm going to go ahead and share the screen here, Corey, and we'll see what they all come up with.
Okay.
So it looks like we got some Tier 2, some air permits, SPCC, the spill prevention and control measures, lockout, tagout procedures and plans, radiation exposures, so a few different ones, and I think you've got a lot of these covered from your background as well.
Yep. Exactly, and it varies based on your industry and facility. You have to know what you're required to have. Are you a facility that's required to have a SPCC plan? Do you handle oils, vegetable oils, any kinds of gasoline, oil that could be discharged into navigable water, and you have enough quantity to make that a requirement? Stormwater pollution prevention plans. Some folks have to have those. Some of that comes with monitoring requirements. Risk management program. Do you have all the associated documentation? One of the low-hanging fruit in this one, when we had SPCC inspections, is rainwater discharge events. You're supposed to log those, right? Before you pump water out of a dike or you drain water out of a dike, you're supposed to evaluate that water, do a visual inspection, and make sure that there's no oil or contaminants in it before you release it. So you're supposed to document those in a formal SPCC plan. A lot of times folks didn't have that up to snuff, and they were behind on it, and everybody knows that it rains periodically in our atmospheres. So if you don't have any documentation, that's going to be an obvious one where you're not following your procedures. So. And then ask yourself, do you have any air or water quality permits? Are you following the requirements for those? Make sure you have your documentation ready and up to date. And then training records as well. These environmental policies and procedures are no different than safety. You do need to give periodic training and education to your employees. Also quiz them, make sure they understand these programs. And if an inspector interviews them, that they could at least give a reasonable answer to what the program is and why it's there. So. EPA's off their website it tells you what an inspection is, and they can be conducted for single media programs like the Clean Water Act, an environmental problem like water quality in a river, for a facility or industry sector or a geographic region, or an eco-based approach. So there's different reasons that they do these inspections, and you see the bullets there. They may interview facility or site reps, review records and reports, take photographs, collect samples, and observe facility or site operations. So just an idea there of what an inspection may involve when it comes to EPA. FDA, are you FSMA compliant? Are you required to be FSMA compliant? Do you have a formal food safety program? Who is your PCQI, Preventive Controls Qualified Individual? If FDA shows up, do you have that individual's contact information, because they should be notified? So these are some questions you may ask yourself, and there's obviously a checklist right there for FDA inspections, pre-inspection, the actual inspection, and then post-inspection. As Joe mentioned, everybody's going to get a copy of this this presentation at the end, so you'll be able to have these checklists available. If you want to go to the next slide, or if you have anything else on FDA, Joe?
Nope. We got a question here for him.
Yep.
So on your screen, this is a new style question for you. You can select a pinpoint drop on the one that you at your facility follow.
Yep. Which of these three best describes your food safety plan if you're subject to FSMA? Not everybody on the call is, but some of our attendees are. So 1, we have preventive controls identified at our facility. 2, our hazards are addressed with our prerequisite programs. And 3, I have no clue what you're talking about. So which of these best suits you? Just use your finger or mouse and click on the one that best suits your facility.
Yeah, pretty good response rate coming in on this one. So I think they like your question, Corey.
Okay.
All right, I think they're all in, it looks like. So we'll go ahead and display the image. So you got a little bit of everywhere.
All over. Yep. So some folks, looks like the majority do have some preventive controls. And then a few don't know what we're talking about. So in the FSMA program, if your system has preventive controls, those are points that you have to ensure that things are operating according to the specifications of that equipment or whatever it might be. So you have to make sure that you're monitoring constantly so that you don't get out of your normal operating modes. And so many facilities also have prerequisite programs, which just means like housekeeping and making sure that you grade and screen grain as it comes in, for instance. If your prerequisite programs eliminate the risk associated with that product, then sometimes you don't need a preventive control. But there are certain things, like if you're creating pet food where it has to get to a certain temperature in order to be safe. So there's different reasons for preventive controls, but just kind of a fun little question there, different way to look at it. So, all right, next slide, Joe.
Yeah, you talked about employee interviews here, and you know, from my experience of have done third-party audits, Corey, having a third-party auditor test your employees in an interview process, see how they're doing, you tend to get a little bit more truthful interactions and conversations. You really can gauge their knowledge of the safety systems and their training and retention of training, rather than if you use an internal. But whatever measure you use to test that, but that when the employee interviews are conducted, this really is going to be the moment of truth for the inspector, where they're going to find the effectiveness of your training. What's the retention? Do they remember and can bring back what was in their onboarding? So this is a good time for you to evaluate your training programs. Do you just sit down, throw a video after video for 3 hours straight, and then send them out on the floor, or have you really gone through your training programs? Any points here you'd like to hit, Corey?
I think that final bullet point, Joe, is you know, working in a production atmosphere, some folks are very nervous when it comes to maybe an inspector coming on site and asking them questions. So for me, preparation is the key to that. Is if you do have formal training and a formal program, make sure employees know that this isn't, you know, they're not out here to get you. They're here to ask some questions and make sure you understand the safety programs or environmental programs that you might have at your site. So preparing those employees and kind of letting them know how to handle it if an inspector comes on site is always helpful, I think.
And depending on the agency, the employee can ask for a company representative to join them. And we did get a good comment come in that if you are in the same room as the inspector with the employee being interviewed, you know, try to fight the urge of answering the questions for the employee. You know, as Timothy here laid out, that can irritate some inspectors if you're answering for them. So if you are in the room as an inspector, allow the employees to answer the questions if they've been targeted right at the employee to answer. So that's a good good comment there, Timothy. So let's get into the walkthrough time. Go ahead.
Make sure you ask, Joe, before you try to sit in on one, you got to make sure that that's allowed. There are certain agencies where that's not allowed either, where they need to interview the employees.
Yep, and that can be established in the scope and then throughout the inspection. So,
all right, the walkthrough inspection. So this is when they're going to go out into the site to do a walkthrough and maybe look at something that is a part of their scope. So you want to make sure you accompany the inspector at all times. Remember, this is not show and tell. Walk to the area within the scope, show them what's in their scope and necessary to satisfy what they're looking for. You don't want to go out of your way and give them a full tour of the facility. This is just supposed to be confined to that scope. If there are any samples or pictures taken, make sure that you get a split of that sample. And then also take the same picture from the same perspective that the inspector did so that you'll be able to recall that and address it. So, and take detailed notes. That's a key thing I can't stress enough. When they leave, you're going to have questions and you're going to be trying to remember what the inspector may have said. This helps if you keep detailed notes, you'll be able to reflect back to it and again know how to handle it. So don't admit fault, just document what they point out. Also, if it can be corrected right on the spot, if it's a real simple fix, have someone fix it while the inspector's still there. And you can bring that up in the closing conference, and sometimes that won't even make the final report if it's fixed before they leave the site. So go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, and one tip there is we'll go to the next slide. If Corey and I are both walking around with an inspector, we may decide that Corey's a better note taker than I am, so he'll take the notes and I'll take the pictures. That way he can focus on his task and I can focus on mine. So if you have multiple people walking around the inspector, you can split up responsibilities.
Yep, good point.
And that was
then return to a quiet area when you're done. Yeah. I don't know. We'd make a good team, I think, there, Joe. Post walkthrough.
You're a good note.
You want to return to a quiet. Return to a quiet area where you can discuss the walkthrough with the inspector. You want to expect to proceed to a closing conference. If that doesn't happen and the inspector just acts like they're going to leave, I doubt this would happen, but you want to make sure that you prompt a closing conference. Make sure you request that because you want to make sure you're clear on any issues that came up during either the interviews, the document review, or the walkthrough. Okay, next slide. Closing conference, the inspector is going to address their findings. Make sure you take detailed notes here again. If you don't understand something, repeat it back to them so that you can make sure you're all on the same page. If it's not addressed by the inspector, make sure you ask these things. What, if any, violations are alleged? Again, don't admit guilt, just document it. When can you anticipate a full inspection report, and what are the next steps with a timeline? So that you're clear on when you'll receive that report and what you need to do next. Any additions to that, Joe?
Nope, I think you covered it pretty well. I would treat it just like any other incident, though. Document accordingly in your systems that you may have. So here's just an example of one that Corey, I think you've used this form in your previous life as well, and one that I've assisted organizations in implementing into their processes for their location personnel. to track those inspections and their document control systems.
Yeah, and this shows you, sorry, Joe, I didn't catch you in time. If you want to go back a slide, this shows you just a real simple one: inspector's name, agency name, purpose of visit. This happens to come from our safety management site. You can add and adjust this if you want to put a box for violations noted. And then you see down below it says supporting files, upload files. We have the capability for you to add pictures or anything that you may need to add, documents, those kind of things. So just wanted to add that. Go ahead, Joe.
Yep.
Here's enforcement pyramid. And this is kind of just a neat visual to show you. On the right-hand side is the approaches for ensuring compliance from the compliance officer's perspective. And on the left-hand side is the attitudes toward compliance. So if you're willing to do the right thing in the bottom, if you look over to the right, that's where it's education, advice, persuasion, voluntary, being a good steward, I guess. That makes it easy. If you're willing to learn and willing to do the right thing and willing to fix things, you're typically not going to get a lot of problems from an inspector or from an agency. If you get up a little, I guess, more kickback on your attitude, that's when you start getting help to comply, whether that's notices of violation, citations, even getting up into civil action, and at the top there, criminal action. So you've decided not to comply, they're going to use the full force of the law. So just kind of a good visual on making it easier for yourself. And obviously there are some times when there's big issues that maybe you don't agree with on. Those things can sometimes lead to litigation. But for the most part, if you follow this enforcement pyramid and try to make things easy by doing the right thing, you're going to have the best outcome.
Also wanted to share some examples. So here's an OSHA inspection checklist. Just one that's out there. You can go to Google. You can use this one. It's just kind of a basic checklist that you could have at your site to try to ease that anxiety of the office personnel, location manager, representative, who's going to interact with those inspectors first before your EH&S representative or management representative arrives, that they have a checklist, that they can take a deep breath, that they need to verify, have them sign in, and just go through your company protocols. Having a simple checklist like we have here can really help those individuals, that they don't unintentionally forget a step in the process. I've also, Corey, included the fact sheet from OSHA. So this is on OSHA's website. You can access it. I encourage using the fact sheet that is available and educating this and incorporating it into your management training and site training, that your sites and your personnel know from an OSHA perspective, but also other inspectors, that preparation. You know, I kind of look at it as a football game, being a former college football player, Corey, that many times the game was decided before they arrived, and that was in our preparation for it. And that goes back to my regional manager harping on us all the time, that how your location looks is how the customers are going to view, and also how the inspectors are going to view the location. So that first impressions.
Yep.
So that kind of parlays, Corey, into a preparation strategy from your experience. Go ahead and share.
Yep, you bet. We'll talk a little here, as Joe mentioned. Preparation is the key to any of this. So the time to prepare is before the inspection happens, which I'm encouraged by all the folks that are on this webinar today, because that means you're trying to prepare and you're doing what we're asking here. You know, we are in a very unique time frame right now where many people are working from home. It's a great time to do your policy procedure reviews, any revisions. Some of you are busier because of this COVID-19 stuff, but most of us are looking for things to continue to fill our time when we're working remotely. So use this time valuably and prepare some of these things. Most of you have some form of safety management system, or you maintain electronic files. Almost every regulatory policy has a review requirement, and typically that's an annual review. Not always, but for the most part, you're required to review these things annually. So take advantage of that. It'd be a shame to get to the end of this remote work and not have, gotten caught up on those kind of things. So use this time wisely. So keep going here to the next slide, please, Joe. Some of the other strategies, take an outreach course. OSHA offers 10-hour and 30-hour courses. We actually have some trainers for that. Learn more about the regulations. The more you learn and the more you understand, the better prepared you can be. One thing that I didn't come into till probably a little later in my career is reading the compliance directives. These are written instructions for OSHA enforcement officers. That's what they use when they come to do an inspection on a particular program. So you've got a standard in the OSHA 1910 book, and you read that standard, you think you understand it. Well, then there's another 20 pages of compliance directive that the officer uses. It's good to understand that. Make sure you understand any of the emphasis programs. Perform audits, internal and external. Mock inspections, like Joe mentioned. Networking. Use other safety professionals, industry professionals, people in your region to, learn how they've handled it. Learn how they manage their systems. You can always learn from others. And then consider outreach. There is, for instance, I have used OSHA outreach in the past. It's a voluntary program where they come in, they do a inspection. While they are inspecting and you're correcting things, also an OSHA inspector can come on site, and if you're working with the consultation, they won't inspect your site because you're currently working with consultation. So we had good luck with it. They can also perform industrial hygiene testing. Keep in mind that any findings you do need to correct, but if you're on that bottom end of that triangle and you're willing to do that, it can be a good thing. Joe, go ahead with this one.
Yeah, and we can help as well. Reach out to us in the question or follow up. Our contact information is there. As far as we talked about third party from safety and environmental programs with our certified safety professionals, and then previous safety directors like Corey, and engineering, environmentalists we have on staff as well. But from a networking perspective as well, DEKRA offers the Safety in Action Conference, which this year is being offered remotely due to the COVID, but years to follow, there are hopes to take that back to an in-person as well, with benchmarking and regional sharing and networking options. We're pretty blessed, Corey, here in the tri-state area of Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, and you're close to Minnesota. There are industry safety specific groups. We have the Ag Co-op Safety Directors Group in Iowa that is an awesome resource for those individuals to share and resource. We've interestingly, I think some on this call or even on it, we've created a network stream where through this COVID, we're able to share through email and different platforms what others are doing, what programs and policies and procedures they put in place. So it just goes to, there's no secrets in safety. Network, borrow, and ask each other. We're all in it for the same reasons, and that's get our employees home in better shape than they came to work. So it's an awesome community that we have here, Corey.
Yeah, and I can attest to that, having a unique perspective. I came from the customer side of DEKRA, and now I'm on the employee side, and I can just say that when I was a customer, one of the most valuable things I got out of being a DEKRA customer was that networking. It really was helpful in my role as a safety director. So here's a few slides that show you the directives, the regional, local emphasis programs, national emphasis programs. These are things that you can look at, and you can see down below it mentions the different regions, region 1 through 10. Look at your region and click on that. This is on OSHA's website, very easy to access. Click on those and you can see what the local emphasis programs are in your area. If you want to go to the next slide, Joe, this gives you an example of what the directives look like. And this was based on directive numbers. So if you look down below, the very first one there is a national directive. It's an interagency early warning system. So you could click on that and it'll give you the compliance. And basically there's a long list, and that's just an example. Next slide. This is an example of one in our area. And this is what it looks like. You can see there's 17 pages on this, anhydrous ammonia facilities. Been a lot of incidents and injuries related to anhydrous ammonia over the past few years, so it prompted this emphasis program. And this is to reduce illnesses, injuries, and fatalities related to exposure. And you can see the scope of who it applies to. This thing started on October 1st of 2019, and you can see Roman numeral 3 there, expiration is September 30th of 2024. So if you fall into that industry, there's a 5-year window where they're going to be possibly coming out to look at your operation. So this just gives you, and you can go through all 17 pages so you know exactly what they're looking for and what that compliance officer is going to be doing when they come to your site. So just good information to have if you're preparing for inspections.
Oh, we got a quick
next slide, Joe.
Corey. Yep.
Okay.
So what are some things you can do to help prepare for regulatory inspection? So we've talked about some internal and third-party audits that are available, policy reviews. Corey touched on that, using our remote time, learning from studying standards and compliance directives, organization review document, or all the above. And it looks like our answers are already coming in. All right, we'll go ahead and calculate the responses here. And oh, we got a smart group.
Oh, we got a smart group, yeah.
So
this was a pretty simple one, but good job.
Got one last one, and then we'll open up for questions and comments. But by virtue of today's webinar, do you feel you're a little better prepared for a regulatory inspection? All right, we got good responses in, so perfect.
Good deal.
Well, I think we did have one question that came in, Corey. We had more of a comment of somebody in their previous life as a safety director explained a situation where they had an OSHA inspector sit across the street or a couple streets down with a pair of binoculars and waited for something to happen, and then they would initiate the inspection. So from an OSHA perspective, this would be from the imminent danger. So OSHA does have the ability to come on site for an inspection if they do see an imminent danger activity going on. They can initiate the inspection at that point in time. And the person goes on and says it was a joy, and I'm sure it was.
Any other questions? We do have a short time here for some questions.
As the questions come in, Drew will be sending out the recording and the PowerPoint for you to use. Please reach out to Corey and myself at any point in time following the webinar. We, in these times can remote in, and we love assisting organizations and sites with different things and helping in preparation. This is our passion, and we do have future webinars coming up, so I think we've got a pretty good rhythm here of every Wednesday from 11 to noon Central Time for the month of April, and we'll be coming out with our May schedule as well. Next week will be how to incorporate coaching into your BBS process, from reviewing observations and conversations and safety contacts. So that will be on the same registration page you registered for this webinar here. It doesn't look like we have any new questions that come in, Corey. So I think we'll go ahead and let Drew have the final touch here and close up the webinar.
Thanks, guys. First of all, thank you both for taking the time to present today. Like Joe covered, everybody who is registered for this webinar will receive an email that will have a recording, the presentation slides, and we'll also put on the links to register for the next upcoming webinars that are scheduled out for the next month or so. So again, thank you everybody for attending. Thanks, Joe and Corey, for your time. And we look forward to seeing you guys attend the next few webinars.
Thanks.